So, hey everyone, welcome to this first episode of our New England Chapters podcast. Very excited today. I have two friends and colleagues of mine, Vince Capone and Dr. Art Trembanis, and we're going to be chatting with them today about their project. It's a flagged expedition and really exciting stuff going on. Vince actually sponsored both Art and I. So you can blame him for having to put up with us. Anyway, just kidding. I just want to welcome you guys to the show and the podcast. And I want to say thank you so much for being here on this first episode, this inaugural episode. It's exciting. I'm looking forward to doing this. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun to be able to talk with fellow club members and chat about what's going on, what expeditions. I want to preface with this a little bit by letting everyone know that you guys are working on, and you've got a really interesting project, and we're going to get into that in a moment. So again, this is a flagged expedition. Vince, what number flag is this, by the way?
Here we go. Wait.
Oh, well, wait for it.
71.
Hey.
71.
71. So this is
And,
a flagged expedition.
and the interesting thing is another person that I sponsored who has done some amazing maritime projects, David Mearns, had this flagged 3 times.
Wow.
So it's sort of, hopefully bodes well, but
That's
we'll
a good
see.
that's a good luck charm now.
It is.
That's awesome. Well, I want to talk a little bit about the project that you're working on. Vince, I don't know if this was you or Art that first came upon this project, but how did you find out about it?
So this goes back over 20 years when I was
Wow.
living in Delaware, close to Art, and I got a call from a gentleman from the Philadelphia Inquirer who knew me from articles he had written about another club member, Peter Hess. That's how we knew each other, saying there was a woman in Riverside named Alice Smith who's looking for a Civil War submarine. And, Alice is just such a wonderful person, and she had done so much research, and I'm always up for an adventure. So I said, okay. And we started searching the Rancocas Creek using different technologies, first with side scan, then with magnetometer, then moving into the creeks that go off the Rancocas Creek. So this has been going on for over 20 years.
Wow.
And her research is what led to this. And what we're looking for is what we call Alligator Jr. Now, the U.S. Navy's first true submarine was the Alligator. And when we say U.S. Navy, that is the northern states. This is the Civil War. During the Civil War, the Confederates had what is more famous, the Hunley, but this is the first official U.S. Navy submarine, the Alligator. That was lost off the Carolina Capes. It's been searched for. It's a near impossible search because nobody knows where it was lost, and it's a small target, and the area has shifting sands, and Art will talk about some of the technologies and things that we use when things are buried versus when things are sitting on the surface. So the prototype to that submarine, which had some really unique innovations like diver lockout, ballast, oxygen generation. I mean, this is all in the 1800s. This is cutting edge, long before Holland's submarine, which is the first true Navy submarine. And there's some little distinctions there, like the Alligator was hand powered, whereas the Holland actually had an engine in it. So we are looking for a prototype because the actual submarine, the odds of finding it are very slim. And the prototype seems to have been lost in this area around Rancocas Creek, which is Riverside, New Jersey. And there's sort of a story with that. There was some, um, let's just say, discussion between investors and de Villeroy, who was the inventor, designer, and builder. And de Villeroy decided he wanted his submarine back from the investors, and he sort of pirated it away in the middle of the night and hid it on the Rancocas Creek, as the story goes. So we are looking for that prototype. And if we find it, I mean, the innovations that are in this submarine are just amazing. You want to add anything to that, Art?
Well, no, I mean, I think this would be a really a one of a kind sort of artifact to find, and as Vince is showing there, the sort of the models of the full sort of alligator to get to have the opportunity to try to find the prototype system for this, which, as he said, had so many of these unique innovations. The lockout system, air purification, would really give us a glimpse. And those documents, don't exist anymore. We don't even have a picture of what de Villeroy looked like. He's this sort of mysterious, genius, this natural genius. Was a very innovative. Yeah, it's been a fantastic book that I've been reading my bedside book the last month or so, and really fascinating. At a time when there was so much innovation going on on the backs of sort of the Industrial Revolution and things. And here you have this pivotal transitional moment in navies, and this representing the Union's entry into submarines, uh, and of course, to find the alligator itself would be amazing, but it's a needle in a haystack of needles, and so to think that there's the prospect of finding this in a creek in New Jersey, is just very, very captivating. And but it also points to just how challenging it can be, even in shallow areas where you've got shifting creeks and mud deposits and things. To even if you think something, oh, it should just be in our backyard. And I think we're finding and is that this has all of the challenges that go with field-based exploration, and even in our backyard. So that's been part of the fun and the challenge of sort of working a program, of working a project. And each one has its own different sets of challenges, and this one has some unique challenges. But it's been working with a really great and committed team of volunteers, starting I mean, we're inspired every time we get together. I mean, Alice just sort of her passion for this project and what she's done along this, it just emboldens us to really help contribute as much as we can in this effort. So I'm well, delighted to be involved in the team and delighted to be here today to speak with both of you.
So, okay, so let's clear something up here. Art or Vince, what's the difference between the prototype, which is what you're calling it? There's the Alligator Jr. and then there's the Alligator. So what's the difference between the two? I think the Alligator Jr. you said is the prototype.
Alligator Jr. is the prototype, and there's a size difference. The propulsion was improved. Some of the ballasting was also redone. It also added a better, or they changed the port light. There's like a little hatch that you stand up in to look forward. Some things like that, to the best I know, but I'm not 100% clear on, all the differences.
So, for the audience's benefit, just so you're aware, so I work in the same industry along with Vince and Art, the marine technology industry. So, excuse me if I get a little geeky here, but there's limitations in searching for these, for anything in aquatic or marine environments. There's always challenges. Anytime you're looking for something in that type of a dynamic environment, Could we talk a little bit about, maybe how the technology has changed? Sonar, for example, has much higher pinger rates, wider angular coverage. There's also better motion compensation, with regard to like pitch, roll, and yaw. Could you talk a little bit more about any issues you and challenges you might have had using sonar in that particular environment?
From a chronological look at what we've been doing, the technology in some ways has definitely been improving. And as we get to the sort of these latter years, that's where Art and Stockton University come in. We started with side scan sonar in the main creek, which is approximately 4 meters to 6 meters deep. And that was a search for the submarine as it could have existed on the surface. When I say on the surface of the sediment, to be specific. We also tried in the main creek a magnetometer, marine magnetometer. Neither of those had positive results. As we say in the business, no joy. Didn't find anything. As we're doing this, Alice's research is also evolving. She is finding out more information. And creek is an improper term for the Rancocas. It's really a small river. There are side creeks from the Rancocas where back in the 1800s there used to be hotels and houses off some of these side creeks. So then we started looking at the side creeks. But these side creeks go into a marsh that is really hard to get into, and the creeks are very shallow to try and drag a mag up through them and things of that nature. So this is where we needed to be able to improve the technology. And first with Stockton doing some preliminary visual drone work, and then we had our group, the Subhunt group volunteers, fund an aerial mag survey. The aerial mag survey is critical because you have this huge marsh area with a lot of small creeks that run up through it that have changed over the years. We can go back to the 1800s maps and look to see how these creeks have changed. Some of them have maintained themselves, some have changed. There's been some human ditching through there. So we thought, a broad aerial search to cover the creeks we weren't able to get into with a towed marine mag would be the way to go. And then we got a big magnetic anomaly, and that's when I said, I need to call in some favors from people smarter than me. I'm just brute force. So we brought in Art and his team. They're the brains. They get the high tech stuff, and from there, I'll let Art describe what was.
Yeah, and before you do, can you explain a little bit? So Vince and I are from the New England chapter, and Art is from the Philly chapter. He's a professor at the Marine campus down at the University of Delaware. And there's a lot of people that are going to be listening to this that some are in the marine world, others are not. So could you explain how a magnetometer works? Because magnetometers are used in all environments, right? Not just the marine environment. And Vince started talking about an aerial magnetometer or dragging a magnetometer. Could you talk a little bit about how those work?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as you mentioned, I'm here in Delaware, and so I'm affiliated with the Philly chapter. And when I got a request from Vince to get involved in this project, it didn't take me long to say yes. Not least of which because he sponsored me for the club and an opportunity to work together on this, and an opportunity to sort of push ourselves into a challenging environment when you're dealing with places like a salt marsh. It is It's kind of, it's not quite liquid and it's not quite solid. It's especially the time, depending on your time of year, you can really get literally stuck in the mud in these sort of places. Now, um, we chose to work in the wintertime when we knew we'd have the kind of a frozen ground a little bit, so a little bit more solid to sort of work in. And also it works out providentially that this is an area where it's fresh enough. It's up far enough into the upper reaches of the Delaware River system. So the right, Cocos Creek, as Vince mentioned, is kind of almost more like a river tributary, secondary to the Delaware River, but it's fresh enough that then that opens up some of our other technologies, which we'll get into. We'll talk about ground penetrating radar. Magnetometer systems are magnetometers look at an induced magnetic field, and they use sensors. There's a couple of sort of major technologies. One uses cesium vapor proton systems, and others use the Overhauser effect. And they're looking for a magnetic field that's induced by ferrous. It has to be some ferrous metal. It's not really going to pick up aluminum, but it's going to pick up things that are going to have, some iron based steel, and certainly something like a submarine, or a prototype of a submarine going to have a lot of steel. I mean, they were using boilers type systems for these, and that was high pressure boiler systems. So what we're looking for is trying to measure that induced field, and relative to, of course, the Earth has a magnetic field as well. And so, it turns out that um, magnetometry is a little more. I found it to be, the physics of it, the geophysics of it. It's in some ways a little maybe less intuitive than some of the things we work with, like side scan or multi-beam sonar systems, because you have to consider how you're traversing, how your sensor is traversing in a field, and that field can have dipoles to it, and so you're looking for these anomalies to help track down where an object is. But one of the great strengths of magnetometry is that the magnetic field can pass through overburden, which could be, what does that mean? That could be like sand, gravel, even through rocks and other materials. So it's really one of those primary tools used not in terrestrial and marine applications to look for objects that could be buried, whether it's a pipeline, power cables, void spaces where people use these to look for, you're looking for things that could be buried. And that is what really we needed in here, because first thing was to get some birds in the air. You want to think, oh, could we see it from satellites? Could we see it from low altitude drone, which is all sort of part of it. When you start to bring in these layers of different sensor modalities, and for a lot of searches, it comes down to having multiple approaches, so that you're layering. Just, you go to the doctor's office, they're gonna get your vitals, but then they're gonna maybe also do ultrasound, or they're gonna do an X-ray scan. And so here it's about sort of trying to bring some of those other technologies into the mix.
Can I just add, for the layman, if you think about when we take something like a submarine, which is a huge chunk of iron, and you throw it into the Earth's magnetic field, when Art was saying induced field, it makes this bump in the field. In other words, the field increases. I like to describe it as, if you have a river and you put a huge rock in it, that water hits the rock and piles up over top of the rock and then drops down on the other side. That's a dipole. The same thing happens with the magnetic field. You throw a chunk of iron in there, especially as big as a submarine, and that field increases and then decreases. So that's what the magnetometer, that's what we're looking for with the magnetometer. And whether it's towing a mag in the water or hanging one from a drone.
Right. Okay, so could you talk a little bit more about some of the other challenges? I mean, I would imagine that there were some interesting and very unusual challenges that you guys faced on this project. First of all, how does a submarine get into a marsh? Which was the first question I would ask. That's kind of interesting in itself. And how did how did you guys deal with some of the using the technology in a marshy area is pretty hard to get around. Those challenges must have been very particular to this project, and I know you're still looking, so it'd just be interesting to know about things that are pertinent to that particular environment.
So I think the way to look at this as the search started in the river proper, just because of your question, like there's no submarine in a marsh, right? So we used very simple technology in the river. And then we realized, it's not here. Alice found some anecdotal stories of kids playing in the marsh and seeing what they thought was a submarine like object. How did it get there? Well, there are these side creeks that in the 1800s were much deeper, but have now silted in. So you think about the technology, now we have to think about, well, it may not be on the surface, it's probably buried. So when Art was talking about using the magnetometer because it can see through the sediments, that's why we went. But you can't drag a marine mag through the marsh. So we had to escalate the technology to the aerial mag. And that aerial mag came up with a big, and I'm going to use a technical term here. Art, will back me up on this. Whammer jammer anomaly. Right. So for the non technical, these magnetic anomalies, the height of the wave can be large or small, and this one was very big. That is proportional to what we think the mass of the prototype was. So the way it got in potentially in the marsh is they drug it up the creek to hide it. It only
Ah,
drew a couple feet of water. This isn't like, a nuclear submarine. This is, 30 feet long and only draws, maybe 2 feet of water. So that's when art's technologies became important, right? So, think of me as sort of the caveman. All the brute force technology didn't work. It's time to hand it off to, more sophisticated technologies. Art, will you help me, please? And he did. So,
Art to the rescue.
Art to the rescue. Absolutely.
So, Art, what are some of the challenges of a site like this?
Yeah, well, it's I mean, depending on the time of year, it goes from difficult to, it could be the plagues of pestilence and locusts and everything
I,
because
I was going to
you
say, you
it's
don't want to be in there in the summer with all the mosquitoes. That's
no,
like the last place
no.
you want to be.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. That you can get the greenhead flies or the blackhead
Oh,
flies. That they make the mosquitoes look like nothing, but that take big chunks out of you. I mean, these really are the worst part of it.
Lime ticks, too.
oh yeah.
That's right. That's a very real concern, and even going into it over the winter time, we had and hats off to Vince and everybody else that safety was always the top priority, and we had fire and rescue folks on standby. We had a great team that went out and actually tamped down the Phragmites. You've got 8 foot tall stands of dense Phragmites in this area. So Phragmites is an invasive salt marsh plant. So you've got these towering and they're thick cords. I mean you can get cut and scraped off with those. And so the groups were going out and sort of kind of like folks would make crop circles, but they were sort of tamping these down with wood sticks to give us a passage, and this was hard fought yardage, throughout, because there's the robotic system, the aerial drones, give us a great ability to hover over difficult terrains, both for the photo-based photogrammetry. So one approach was to do low altitude drone photos, and Steve and the team from Stockton had done some drone-based photos. So drone photogrammetry is one of the primary tools that we use for a lot of our coastal survey work these days, and you can take that down to like object level things. But by taking densely overlapping photos, you can do 3D reconstructions, and you can do that to get beautiful photo mosaics, but you can also reconstruct digital elevation models. And so one of the things I did early on when I got involved is got a hold of some of the aerial drone surveys that Steve and his team had done, and I processed those to be able to again look for maybe there might be some subtle features. We're seeing every year all sorts of new discoveries come out. LiDAR in the jungles in Central and South America. Suddenly piercing through these jungle canopies and finding whole cities and things like that. So the remote sensing, which was the starting point. It's all about sort of funneling our way progressively towards finer and finer resolution, closer and closer to the ground, but trying to work smart. We don't want to first start by trying to go on the ground with shovels or with ground penetrating radar unless we know where to go. So that aerial magnetometry really kind of helped give us, okay, there's something is setting off the magnetometer here, and it's not showing up anything on the surface. Let's proceed to like try to get something
Yeah.
on the ground. And that's where I came into offering our ground penetrating radar system. So ground penetrating radar is another of a variant of geophysical sensing, which case rather than using sonar waves or sort of radar, we're using radio waves to send out pulses of radio frequency waves into the ground, and then measuring the return coming back off of them. And ground penetrating radar is used, famously. There's the scene in Jurassic Park where it's made to look as if somehow you could see, a T-Rex in the ground. Well, it's never quite as exciting as that. We're seeing little wiggle trace, little waves, and so in these wiggle traces, we're looking for a whammer jammer. We're looking for something that really, sticks out. So we had to, just as we do with whether it's towed side scan or other marine geophysical work, we needed to then be able to get into an area where we could do dense lawn mowing lines back and forth, pushing a cart, pushing a radar cart that was emitting 400 megahertz radio waves into the ground. And so we had to figure out, how are we going to get out there? What are we going to do? It's winter time. We've got to worry about cold. So we've got to worry about, cold conditions for people. And if you fall into the waters here, it's really cold. You got, those concerns. We're working this heavy equipment, having to get out through over branches and through around trees out into this salt marsh area. Had to prep the area, and so prepping that grounds meant folks pushing down these phragmites. And then we also realized we've got to be able to make as close to contact with the surface as we can with GPR. And so for that, we settled in on having a series of you know 2x4, well, 4x8 sort of sheets of plywood that we could lay out. And so teams were having to sort of move them. We were a little inchworming our way back and forth across this sort of salt marsh. So I say it's hard yardage, doing this kind of work, knowing particularly because we have to get very dense space lines, because that GPR is only looking under the small little footprint underneath it. Now it can image down to maybe as much as 10 or 12 meters into the substrate, into the ground, depending on the composition. And that's why it becomes really important. Like, is there a lot of fines? Is there muds? That makes it challenging for the imagery. Is there any amounts of salt? If you have enough salt, that salt in salt water will absorb the the radar waves. So we had an area that was fresh enough that we thought we could do it. And so then we spent, hours that full day out there, inching our way back and forth across this salt marsh area, gathering this data, and then trying to quickly as we could in the field try to do some preliminary processing to now take these rows and rows of GPR and now be able to generate horizontal slices. So it's kind of the way that medical technicians assemble, MRIs or CAT scans of your body with all these little slices, and then being able to look in the horizontals. We did that same thing now using the ground penetrating radar. And as with everything, a lot of times about finding something is the struggle of finding where it isn't. We were working in these side creeks because they'd done the real hard work, combining the historical archival research, and then they did the work in the field to say, okay, is it in the main body of the creek? It's not there. Okay, well, we had a lot of indications to suggest that it could be up one of these little side creeks, and so working our way into these areas with new technologies, and the area we imaged a portion of this whammer jammer of a dipole named after Felix von Wammerjammer, the theoretician who coined the term. And we worked that site very, very well to the point that I feel very confident in saying that we didn't discover something directly under there, but we know we've only imaged a portion, one half of this dipole. So again, we're continuing to work kind of into you kind of remove all the other areas and you keep sort of inching. So I feel like we definitely moved the yard markers on this. I think we're all, feeling that there's more work to be done there. And again, and so it's just like sort of picking up, what did we learn from this? What can we apply going forward? And how can we sort of take that iterative, and it was not, a sort of flippant approach. It was a very sort of intentional and strategic effort that went into all of this.
So, just throwing one thing out, you mentioned Steve and Stockton University. Steve Nagowitz is also a club member and Philadelphia chapter guy. So,
Oh, yeah, that's right. He's on the project as well. All right, so tell me, what would be the ideal outcome here in finding the Alligator Jr.? Would it be excavation, preservation in situ? Would it be recovery? I mean, you think about how difficult would that be? And what are some of the things, if you do find it, what are you thinking?
it's a very good question. If you're speaking archaeologically, you would want to excavate and get to some of the internal portions of the submarine. This area is very difficult to work. It's also in a sensitive environmental area. So you would, to do that kind of excavation, you would need permitting and techniques that, aren't as detrimental to the marsh as unless as if you were in a big field, a farm field. It's easy to go in there with a tractor and dig it up, but think of this as more as a sensitive habitat, so we can't just crush stuff in the habitat. But assume we could get to where it was and excavate, you'd need permitting, and you'd want to get inside the same way they got inside the Hunley. You'd want to look at certain fittings and things of that nature. However, archaeological and financial don't always go together. That's a very expensive endeavor. Going back to 1990, when an Explorers Club group that I was part of in upstate New York, we found America's oldest intact warship. That warship sat in 110 feet of water, totally intact, gorgeous wreck. And we looked at raising it. And the cost is not just to raise that wreck or to excavate that submarine. Well, once I get it out, what do I do with it? The preservation is a 10-year process. If you look at what they did when they raised a portion of the Monitor. They literally built a portion of a museum and a tank to put that cheese box, the gun turret of the Monitor, into after they raised it. If you look at the Hunley, what they had to do to preserve that submarine, which is now in the museum, we're talking millions of dollars for the preservation afterwards. So it's going to be a combination of what can we do archaeologically within certain environmental parameters, and what funds can we raise.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think a lot of people don't know that. They just don't realize what goes into not just finding something, but then what do you do with it? How do you preserve it? What's the historical significance here? I mean, maybe talk a little bit about that. I know we talked about it at the top of the conversation, but what is the historical significance of finding the Alligator Jr.?
So it was the prototype that launched the Union Navy into submarine warfare. It had a number of innovations. We have assisting us another Explorers Club member, Dr. James Delgado, who has looked at these Civil War submarines, one off the coast of Panama and others, and he could really opine more on the historical significance, but we've just sort of skimmed the wave tops on. There were innovations like cleansing the breathing air, ballast diver lockout, pressurizing the diver lockout chamber, that fill in that sequence of the evolution of man's underwater exploration. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of our exploration comes funded by, military events. And the Civil War prompted an explosion of research into submersibles.
Yeah, and I think it would importantly remind us of that pivotal moment in our nation's history as well. It was, brother against brother, family against family, and that this the Civil War was a period of, it was total warfare, and you had the innovations of, and the best minds on each side, okay, working towards how best to sort of improve and master the warfare in this struggle for the very reality of the nation, right? And to realize that there is that part of that. It's easy sometimes, we see it, and you go to Fort Sumter, or you go to Antietam, or you go to some different battlefields, but realize that some of this history is underwater, and potentially, you drive right past this area and you might not realize, oh, there could be a Civil War submarine here in this marsh. And so it's important and again, just the innovations of it, because so many of these, they were all having to solve these very challenging problems about having people living in there. How are you dealing with the buildup of poisonous gases? How are you dealing with locking folks out? How are you dealing with ballasting and adjusting and things through? And certain innovators and folks like the Villeroy were very sort of close. They were holding their cards very close to their hands. So the challenge of, once we do find out in that issue of like what then becomes of it, of course, is in many ways maybe a financial challenge, even more than a technical one, although there's great technical challenges. I think one of the exciting things that's been emerging over the last handful of years, though, is the proliferation of digital twins and our ability to do detailed scans and reconstructions, in situ, in ways that, if we could, penetrate in, we could then perhaps try to make this site available to folks in ways that maybe provide some another sort of in between sort of option. Even getting things, these examples, bringing stuff in, whether it's the Mary Rose or the Hunley, or the monitor and stuff. It's amazing when you can go into these museums and see those, but it's very expensive. And then it's also limited too to who can get there to those museums. And I think sort of this realm, which has been an exciting thing to see develop, is not just the sensors and the robotic platforms, but also our ability to take these data and make engrossing photorealistic digital twins that then can be interacted with. That you could potentially walk through this site or walk through this area. In fact, one of the things that I did as a product for the team was we did drone surveys while we were out there doing the GPR, and some of those we did to provide digital elevation models in those areas. Some of those we did with the intent of making a more of a realistic representation of that scene. And now we've hosted those up on some sites, and so you can go and you can walk around that marsh. We didn't want to try to bring Alice out there onto that marsh, but I could put a VR set with her, and she can literally like walk across that marsh area, and we can. And it gives us ability to share those scenes, but it also gives us an added ability to interpret those scenes, because humans, we're designed to sense the environment around us at the scale of which we are. Like, we're really good at sort of doing that. We kind of had to, right? You'd have to know, like, where is there a lion going to be coming after me over in this sort of area? And so being able to now with just consumer VR sort of headsets, I can take something that we've generated in the field from a drone survey, and I can now make a scene, and I can go back and walk through that site, or I can bring in another expert who might help in interpreting that area. And so we kind of we were testing it out, and remember, we've tested it out on some other sites, but we implemented it here with our previous expedition to the site, and we'll continue to sort of do that and make that part of what we can. Again, it's a way for us to. I think it's important for us, as members of the club, we are privileged to be able to get and do these amazing expeditions, and it's great to be able to share them with other club members
Absolutely.
and new and older members. But I think it's always been a strong sort of goal and mandate of the club to say, what can we do to then also try to show that. And podcasts and things like this are also an important way of doing that, but thinking about ways in which we can try to take and share these data in an enriching way with the broader public.
You could see why I asked to bring in the smart guy, right? That technology bringing people into the environment virtually is just something that we never thought of. We only think of, well, how do I raise it? How do I put it in a museum? There's a whole new world out there, and that's
Mm.
why it's important that the club embrace newer, younger members instead of just us older guys who've done the brute work. And I really appreciate the fact that Art brought his team up there, and it was unbelievably helpful. He brings that perspective of this new technology, so it's been a godsend to the expedition.
So what's the next step in, I know you've been doing this in the winter, which obviously makes sense. It would be quite difficult to do some of the stuff you've been doing in the summer. So what's the next step? What are you going to do next?
Okay, so we have a magnetic anomaly in the marsh. We did GPR that came up with negative results, and the data was very good. So the first thing we did was go back and revisit all the aerial drone mag data. I was confident in the GPR data. I was watching their the raw data coming in. I'm not the processing guy, but back in the day, I used to find underground tanks with GPR, so I kind of knew the technology a little bit. And we think the ground, at least, and Art, please correct me if I misinterpreted this, but the ground, not only did we not see a large contact, the ground looked undisturbed where that anomaly was. So there's something causing the anomaly, and there's two potential theories. One, as Art tried to describe it, is, I'll go back to my rock in the river analogy. So you have, this big water wave coming up over the rock, and then on the downside, it's lower. So when you have a magnetic anomaly that has an increase and a decrease in the magnetic field, the object isn't at the peak or the trough. And all we had was a trough. The object is actually at the intersection between the baseline and the peak and the trough. So theory number one is that because the drone survey sort of cut off the anomaly, that the object, we didn't get the peak to go with the trough, and the object is actually offset by the size of the anomaly, the size of the peak. The other thing that it could be is there was some human ditching going on when they redid the railroad to help drain off some of the water. And if you drove a metal piling, a small metal piling, let's call it 8 inches in diameter, into the marsh, and you were using that as a pull point to move some equipment, the GPR spacing was, what would you say, Art, 0.8 meters?
Yeah.
Something like that. So, you literally could have missed that piling that was driven in and cut off when they were done. That's possibly an answer as well. So, and this gets too geeky, but vertical metal objects do weird things as opposed to horizontal metal objects when it comes to magnetometer data. So now you've got two possibilities, and we have a gap in the aerial data between where the wood line is, where we know it couldn't be, and the edge of the marsh, just because of how we were limited in the area we could cover with the drone and the time and the money and everything like that. So the only thing we can, or the best thing we can do now, is to go in, think of the aerial drone as a spotlight. So we got this big spotlight on the area, and we know there's something there. We're going to go in with a walking, highly sensitive magnetometer and walk some lines through the marsh up to the woodline area and along the side creeks. So we were thinking we might be able to squeeze it in early spring, and that fell through for a number of reasons. So we're on hold now till next winter when the ticks die down and the footing gets stronger, and we'll go back in and do a high resolution mag survey. And if I can convince Art to come back, he'll bring some of his toys too. So
Can't wait.
well, a lot of the tenacity to keep this project going over 20 years goes to Alice, who is the researcher. I mean, she has kept this project alive. A huge amount of thanks to Art for bringing his team up, and it really opened my eyes to some of the new technologies. Like I said, I'm more of a brute force guy, and I really saw some things there and learned some things that I would not have learned. A huge thanks to Stockton University and Steve Nagowitz, who did some of the mag work in the river and the creeks. And also his colleagues at Stockton and him, they flew the visual aerial drone survey. So this project, well, there's just the two of us here on this podcast, is really a team effort. And I am indebted to those team members, because without a team, you're nothing. So I say thanks to everyone. And I want to thank you, Rhonda, for allowing us to bring this project to life. And maybe, in a year, Art will have some fancy depiction of this site and hopefully a submarine to go with it.
That'd be amazing. We're staying tuned. We're staying tuned. We're going to follow you guys along the way. So I'm sure there's much more to learn. So I want to take the time to thank you both for being on our inaugural episode of the Explorers Club New England Chapter podcast. Much appreciated. And Vince and I hail from the New England chapter. Art and Steve are from the Philly chapter. And you mentioned James, I think he's from the DC chapter. But Vince, you were originally from the Philly chapter, weren't you?
Yep. For 30 years, I was in the Philly chapter. I'm a new member of the New England chapter. So, and we did have Matt Peoples from the Philly chapter was also he was our photographer and lending a hand. Gotta do a shout out to Matt. And we're arts team. We have some young people there. We're going to see if we can't come up with a way to get younger members to come in. The chapter, the club is really phenomenal, and it has been. I mean, I came in '89, so I'm an old man, and it has been a consistency in my life. And if we can get new people to come in to bring new innovations, new technology, that's a great thing. And we have a student membership, but when we leave the university or the college and we get into our first job, there's a time when finances may not allow, because it's also not inexpensive to be a club member, not allow you to sort of make that bridge. And I think we need to, as an organization, think about how do we bridge people from that student membership into a full membership. So, and that's something that I've had some discussions with people about. But we need the new blood to keep coming in.
Absolutely.
I would say, from my perspective, the spirit of exploration is very much alive in expeditions like this, and across generations, across club chapters, and I was just so grateful and appreciative of all the folks involved in this program, and the ways in which the club is supports this blend of science and history and innovation, and in many ways what is also captivating about this story is that human dimension of what the Alligator Jr. represented at a time of it was about innovation and risk taking and trying to push a boundary. And so it kind of, I felt like I always felt like I would turn over around and see the Villois over my shoulder, like, come on, like, let's see it, like, let's see what you got, like, and trying to push it. And so that's what we'll do, is we're gonna it's been there that long. It's an alligator. It crawled up into this creek, and it's not going anywhere. So we're gonna wait till the next winter, and then we're gonna try to squeeze that secrets out of it. But and so nature and the marine and coastal realm doesn't often release its secrets so easily, and this one is it's a
Yep.
sometimes those you get that oyster, it's tough to sort of crack open, but we're gonna try some different approaches to it, and try to document it to the fullness that we can, so that we can help share and promote those stories.
That's great. Well, again, we're going to be following along and keeping everyone up to date on what you guys are doing with Flag 71, is it, Vince?
Flag 71.
Flag 71 on the expedition for the Alligator Jr. And we'll keep everybody apprised of what's going on. And again, thank you for being on the first episode.
It was an honor. Thank you for having us for the
Absolutely.
first episode.
Thank you for being on the first episode of the New England chapter of the Explorers Club. Much appreciated.